Right now, in the north of Ethiopia, a man is standing on a crack in the ground. It runs about 500 meters. In places, it is wide enough to swallow a car. He says the ground under his boots sounds hollow. He says it shivers when somebody nearby takes a step. He is standing on the seam of a continent coming apart. That is the story anyway. You have probably seen the photograph. It goes around every couple of years with the same caption. Africa is splitting in two. A new ocean is being born. The Red Sea will pour through the gap and hand a coastline to countries that have never had one. The crack opened in 2005. That was 21 years ago. There is still no ocean. And the reason is stranger than the headline. It is not that the split is slow. It is that the ocean has already been there 4 separate times and left. And there is a real chance the whole thing never finishes at all. Start with what is actually underneath Ethiopia. The Afar region sits where 3 tectonic plates meet. The Nubian plate, carrying most of Africa. The Somali plate, carrying the eastern edge. The Arabian plate, heading north. They are pulling away from one another. GPS stations across East Africa measure it at 6 to 7 millimeters a year between the 2 African plates. That is roughly the speed a fingernail grows. Over a full human life, 80 years of it, the 2 halves of Africa move about half a meter apart. A person could step over everything that happens in their lifetime. The rift has been running for 30 million years. In all that time, it has produced a valley, a chain of lakes, and a great many volcanoes. Not an ocean. Which is not the same as nothing. That valley is one of the largest structures on the surface of the planet. It runs 6,000 kilometers from the Red Sea down to Mozambique, and it is visible from orbit. The same forces raised Kilimanjaro. They pushed up a wall of highlands that catches the weather coming west, which is why the eastern side of the rift is dry savanna and the western side is rainforest. So the rift has already redrawn Africa. It changed what grows there, what lives there, and where our own ancestors were walking when they first came down out of the trees. It just has not opened an ocean. But before any of that, there is the crack most people have actually seen, and it is not this one. In March 2018, the ground tore open across a road in Kenya, 15 meters deep, 20 meters wide in places. It ate a highway and ran straight through a man's house while he was still inside it. Within a day, the footage was everywhere, under headlines saying Africa was coming apart. It wasn't. A Kenyan geologist named Gladys Kianji looked at it and found the problem straight away. The ground on both sides was flat and level, and a real rift leaves a step. The crack was not continuous. There were bridges of soil across it, and there had been no earthquakes. It was rain, loose volcanic ash off Mount Longonot, baked into a hard crust by drought, tunneled out from underneath by water until the crust caved in. A gully, not a rift. The correction never traveled. The photograph did. But here is where almost everyone misses the point. Splitting the land was never the hard part. Head northeast from the real crack and you reach the Danakil Depression. The floor of it sits 125 meters below sea level. Drop a 40-story building into it and the roof would still be under the level of the sea. Except there is no sea. It is one of the lowest places on the planet and one of the driest. In summer, the air goes past 50 degrees. There is no shade because nothing grows tall enough to make any. And 50 kilometers away, over a ridge you could drive across in an afternoon, there is an entire ocean waiting. The hole is already dug. The door is simply shut. A ridge called the Danakil Alps stands between the Red Sea and the lowest ground in Africa. And until that ridge fails, the water stays outside. And here is the part almost nobody quotes. The water has already been inside. At least 4 times the Red Sea came over that barrier and flooded the Danakil. The last time was around 130,000 years ago. There were people in Ethiopia by then. Anatomically modern humans, our own species. Somebody stood on that shore and watched it. Then the barrier closed and the sun did the rest. There are fossil coral reefs out there now, sitting in the middle of the desert. Underneath them, salt. Hundreds of meters of it in places. The Afar cut that salt into slabs by hand and loaded onto camels, the way their families have for centuries. They are mining a dead ocean. Now the floor really drops, Because the assumption sitting underneath all of this, that a rift once started will finish, is not true. Most of them do not finish. Geologists have a name for the ones that quit. Aulacogans, failed rifts. 1.1 billion years ago, North America began splitting down the middle. That is about a quarter of the age of the Earth. The most complicated living thing on the planet at the time was algae. The tier ran 3,000 kilometers, from Kansas up around Lake Superior and back down through Michigan, and it poured out lava for 15 to 20 million years. Then it stopped. Nobody is certain why. Lake Superior is sitting in the hole it left behind. There is another one buried under the Mississippi Valley, 560 million years old, long dead, still making earthquakes. So that settles it then. Africa is just another rift that will quit. Well, not quite. Because this one has something the dead ones did not. In September 2005, a seismologist named Adele Ayele in Addis Ababa watched earthquakes stack up on his instruments for 10 days and could not account for a single one of them. The answer came from orbit. A geophysicist named Tim Wright at the University of Leeds compared radar images of that desert taken before and after and found that the ground itself had moved. On the ground, it did not look like science. The volcano threw ash and gas across the region, and when it settled, the herds were dead. 700 goats, 200 camels, 70 donkeys. One person was injured. Nobody was killed. 8 meters, along 60 kilometers of desert. At the normal rate of separation, 8 meters takes about 1,000 years. This took 10 days. Cynthia Ebinger, a geophysicist who has spent decades working in AFAR, describes the process as an overfilled balloon. Long silence, then violent release. And underneath all of it, there is a plume of hot rock rising out of the mantle. That is the engine the mid-continent rift is thought to have lost. Out in the Gulf of Aden, oceanic crust is already forming. That is not a continent stretching. That is a seafloor starting. The honest answer is that nobody knows which way this goes. 5 million years, 50 million, or never. And that is the part that should bother you. Not because of Africa, because the ground under your feet is not neutral ground either. Every continent is built out of this. Rifts that succeeded and rifts that quit halfway. If you are watching this anywhere between Minnesota and Memphis, you are sitting on top of a failed continental split right now. There is one under the Rhine. There is one under the North Sea. You cannot feel it because it moves slower than your fingernails grow. You cannot see it because the part that matters is 9 kilometers beneath you, and you cannot wait it out because the process takes longer than our species has existed. What you are calling solid ground is a pause, which is where the headline has it exactly backwards. Africa is not breaking. Nothing is snapping it. There is hot rock pushing up from underneath, and the crust on top is doing what a rising loaf does. Thinning, stretching, splitting along the top. The crack is not damage. It is the surface of something swelling. And every ocean we can name did this first. The Atlantic was in AFAR once. A hot, low, salt-choked desert full of volcanoes, sitting where Morocco now faces Nova Scotia. The Red Sea was in AFAR. The one in Ethiopia is not a continent going wrong. It is the ordinary way an ocean gets made, caught in the only phase slow enough to stand on. 2 million people live in AFAR. Most are nomads, moving with their goats between wells. There are almost no rivers out there, so they take their water off the volcano instead, finding the vents where steam escapes through the rock, laying branches across them, and collecting whatever condenses underneath. They drink from the thing that is pulling their country apart. They have never needed it to hold still. You will not see the ocean, neither will anyone else. But nothing was ever still. You just live at a speed that lets you mistake it for solid. And that mistake is the only reason anybody ever built anything.